it was quite funny when we asked we asked unhinged Grok what how Rocket Pool should use AI, and it basically said with lots of swear words and that sort of stuff, basically that we should partner up with an AI company. Um, it doesn't. It's okay. The AI company doesn't have to be real or do anything, which was quite funny. It was actually shockingly close to what probably happens.
Yeah, yeah, I did actually very much enjoy the unhinged grok. I guess to the rest of you guys, it was just speaking Australian, but it was quite funny. I know one of the main focuses, and I certainly saw Mav and Grant, kind of. I mean, boy, it seemed like they were in business development meetings throughout most of the conference. Any potential leads for rETH mints, or any key takeaways from Rocket Pool and the team about ETH Denver?
Yeah, both Mav and Grant were talking to a lot of groups, a lot of like protocols, a lot of um, uh, yeah, a lot of kind of like crypto aligned peeps. Um, I think rETH mints is a tricky one. Denver's not really necessarily that sort of thing, although it is from a kind of like an integration perspective, but not necessarily from like it's not. We're not going to get that many big rETH liquidity people there necessarily, but it is much more of like an integration sort of thing. We met. I actually met up with the one of the co-founders of Symbiotic at the FOMO Factor side event, and that was a really good chat. And so we'll kind of like follow up with him around um, getting kind of like some good integration with their LRT because LRTs are definitely from what we've been kind of like talking to our growth about are definitely a growth market. So that's definitely something that we'll kind of have a look at. But yeah, it's more around integrations. We also chatted with like Chainlink in terms of again more to do with like new chain expansion because again that's where a lot of the growth is happening at the moment. And so trying to educate ourselves on what like a chain strategy might look like is definitely something that we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, excellent. Maybe we can explore a couple of those things further down. But yeah, I think that's the whole key thing of ETH Denver. It's kind of the networking, and it's also just a time to be able to learn. I know I, for one, I think I posted a few things into the governance channel in here, but I learned quite a bit about the emerging market for pre-confirmations and how that might integrate in. And I don't think without being at ETH Denver, I don't think I would have really immersed myself in it and really started to wrap my head around it. So that was a good kickstart. And yeah, it seemed like a number of the side events were really good in terms of education and learning and trying to make those interconnections.
Yeah, pre-comps are definitely interesting in terms of like obviously the more yield that our node operators earn, the higher the yield on rETH as well. And so both those things go kind of hand in hand. So that was definitely interesting. Yeah, it's definitely an emerging thing, but something that is yeah, and you've kind of like taken that mantle on, which is really good to see that we're to kind of like drive that forward. So that's good.
Yeah, it was definitely a good ETH Denver, I think, in that way. And it was also just kind of nice to hang out with a lot of people from the community. I mean, one of the highlights for me, I think, was certainly the Rocket Pool meetup. It was a nice venue that Mav put together, just food, beer, and billiards. So it was actually quite nice.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun actually. The venue was really nice. We had a really good turnout. A lot of different people. Really good chats. So I really enjoyed that actually. I think the other one of the other kind of memorable moments was. Do you remember at the FOMO Factor thing when they did the DApp node thing?
That was good.
That was so so for everyone else. So so Dapnode had like a little presentation on the stage, and what they did was they had a guy who was chained and then put in a barrel full of water, and he had to basically hold his breath for however long the guy was there setting up his Dapnode. So his Dapnode took about. He said he could hold his breath for about 4 minutes. So try not to go over 4 minutes with setting up his DApp node. And so, yeah, so you had this one guy who was setting up a DApp node and the other guy who was holding his breath underwater and trying to get out from the chains. And then basically, as soon as but they had to do it in time, basically this. And so it was really funny and really, it was something different. It was quite cool.
Yeah, at first I thought they were joking about it, and then you saw the barrel come up on the stage with chains and and I thought, oh, they're serious. And yeah, Lansky, the from Dapnode that put it on was, kind of in there. You can imagine the part about like, type in your password and remember your password. And I thought, oh, we're gonna kill him if he doesn't remember his 16 character password here. But I won't give it away. But if you ever see the video, it's definitely worth watching.
I was expecting any moment there would be to be like a Wi-Fi issue. So it was like, and then they would have been screwed.
Yeah, that was that was a good time. I definitely remember that. So one of the other things though that I don't think I quite maybe this came up in trading and I had kind of math sticking in here, but I definitely figured it out. I think maybe during the Rocket Pool event, just chatting with everybody here. But um, maybe can you back up a little bit and just tell us a little bit about the smart node stack? I know in the past I was inquiring, okay, well, V1, V2, what are we doing? Now we've got a dev version back on one, but I guess I learned a little bit here in at ETH Denver here that the team is going to stick with the V1. You want to kind of explain that a little bit more and some of the reasonings behind that?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. It's not something that necessarily that deserves like a full announcement necessarily, um, but we should probably communicate it in some way. So, with the smart node stack, obviously we've been working towards V2. So V2 was kind of like a full rebuild of the smart node stack. Um, Now, where we've kind of like got to is making the jump to V2 is actually quite difficult um, because it is a jump and we have to make sure that everything kind of works. Now, from the kind of like node operator side, we're pretty comfortable that V2 works pretty fine. It was kind of like the ODAL part of it that was more the issue, and obviously that's quite key. So we were going to kind of like run it side by side and all this sort of stuff. But when I actually spoke to the guys, what they kind of came to was there are some things that they really love about V2, and then there are some things they actually don't like about V2. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to kind of like migrate the parts that we really like from V2 into V1 and kind of like improve those elements but and then kind of like progressively add the other bits and pieces that we that are also nice to have. So that's what we're doing. So I think officially V1 will still continue basically kind of like from now on. We won't necessarily have a big jump to V2 in terms of it being like a full stack rebuild. But we will kind of like integrate the elements that are really good. And V2 was probably more. It was probably more a quality of life thing for developers rather than delivering for node operators. V2 is a little bit faster, but those things can be integrated into V1 anyway. So that's what we're kind of like doing. For Pectra, I think we haven't quite decided what the versioning will be oh no, sorry. For Pectra, it'll be V1. So that's fine. The versioning for Saturn 1 and Saturn 2, I haven't specifically said whether it's going to be we're going to jump to V2 in terms of the actual version numbering. But would make sense to go to version 2 for Saturn 1. And so that's probably where we'll go to version 2, but it'll under the hood it'll be exactly the same as version, just you know,
Yeah, you chopped just a little bit there at the end. And so like for Saturn, you think you'd still like reuse the 2.0 nomenclature, or would you jump to
yeah.
version? Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go to V2 as in the version number, but under the hood it'll still be the same, same code base. It's just it'll be with all the Saturn 1 kind of like functionality and that sort of stuff, because that is kind of like I guess a feature set um, major increase. And as I said, we'll integrate the V2 code base incrementally over time.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it made a lot of sense there, and I think as I understood, it saves the team a lot of duplicity effort. Right, you were having to maintain two different code bases, and now kind of with this decision, we've got a little bit of surety in terms of the code base, and we'll just keep with version 1 and slowly add in V2, and that way you don't have to maintain another code base. Is that correct?
That's right. Something had to happen. either either we don't we either we weren't going to go to V2, or we were going to jump to V2, because we can't maintain the two code bases for very long. So that something we had to make the call, and that's the call we've made, is that we'll stick with V1, but we will progressively integrate the V2 functionality into V1.
Yeah, well, definitely seemed like Patches and Fornex were happy with that decision. So if they're happy, I'm happy. Let me talk a little
Yeah,
bit about.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's a good segue into Saturn here, right? A lot's going on. I guess I want to ask you a little bit about how Saturn is going, but in particular, you brought up Pectra and Haleski, right? And I think I saw news today. I think I saw two bits of news. One, that they've delayed the Pectra. They're not announcing the mainnet date. They want to do more testing. And two, did Haleski finalize today? Question mark. I don't know. My node is
Yeah,
like slowly sinking, so I have
yeah,
no idea what Haleski is doing.
yeah. I haven't experienced it from that perspective yet either. Um, but apparently uh, Stokes on I can't remember, I'm trying to remember his first name. Anyway, Alex Stokes, who's now, is he one of the head of research for the Ethereum Foundation? Anyway, he announced on Twitter that Holski had finalized. So that is really good news. There was talk of like a shadow fork of Holski, but with it finalizing, maybe that's off the table now, because they were thinking about doing a shadow fork to help staking protocols continue developing. But with Holski finalizing, hopefully that's kind of the end of it. Although what the validator set looks like now is going to be really interesting. Although it finalized, that means that it's probably uh, still processing slashings. Maybe we have to see what the actual validator set looks like. So our testnet still might be affected, and we'll see what's happening with this shadow fork.
So you're gonna kind of wait and see. I mean, like we've released part of Saturn on a DevNet on Hulski, right? Is that, if people want to still play with that, should they do that? Is that still the current direction?
Yes, that is still the current direction, and until we know otherwise. At the moment, at the moment we don't know. At the moment we don't know. At the moment it doesn't matter too much. So it's actually hit us at the right point, because we're in the middle of the two devnets. So that's actually okay. If it had happened like a few weeks ago when we just launched or wanted to launch on DevNet 1, it would have been a bit harder. But No, for the moment it's okay. We will figure out what's happening with Holsky over the next like week or so, and then we can kind of like target what we're doing with DevNet 2, kind of like near it. We're not scheduled for kind of like launching DevNet 2 for another 3 weeks. So we've got kind of like 3 weeks to figure out what the plan is in terms of testing DevNet 2. So that's actually really good for us. Yeah, within the next 3 weeks, hopefully everything will be kind of like sorted out in terms of either we'll know that Holsky's fixed and we'll maybe do a redeployment of the DevNet on Holsky, or it'll be on one of these shadow forks or whatever they come up with.
Okay. And then just before we get too far into Saturn here, then back on the Petra thing, I guess we as current node operators on mainnet, we're just on standby to standby, right? The core devs have to figure out what they want to do with Petra. The client teams have to produce their final clients once they agree upon an epoch number or block number to fork, and then basically we'll just wait till we hear from you, the team at Rocket Pool, about if we need to update our clients for the mainnet Petra. But right now we're just on pause, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think most of the clients had release candidates, but I suspect now with some of the issues they'll have to reset that and have new versions. I believe like MEV boost was probably one of the only things that we were waiting on. But with this whole new with this Holsky stuff going on and the Sepolia stuff going on, I suspect there'll be all new releases and all that sort of stuff. So Fornex is definitely on that. He's keeping an eye on what the versions are and what we need to, and we'll definitely communicate what the Petra version is that you guys should be on.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, then maybe let's talk about Saturn in general. Kind of where are we in the Saturn 1 development, and are we still on track? What's the ETA, and what are you thinking? What's the 411 on this?
Yeah, so obviously we put out DevNet 2, got some really good feedback off of that, and we've kind of improved the smart node based on that. There was one smart contract thing that came out of that, and that's whether we do this kind of like, it's probably a bit much to go into it all in the community call, but whether there's these two strategies, which is like the 2 transaction strategy and the 3 transaction strategy. We're kind of bouncing that around a little bit. The changes at the smart contract level, there's a little bit of changes, but it's not too bad to switch between the 2 different ones. But we need to make a call on which one where we go for, and so that's one thing that I'm gonna try and work on this week, is to try to get consensus on that. And so that's one thing from the DevNet 1 feedback. But we are kind of like working our way through the DevNet 2 stuff. So DevNet 2, DevNet 2 includes, so DevNet 1 was all about deposits. So being able to deposit and get to an active validator with megapools. So that was kind of like the scope of DevNet 1. DevNet 2 is around reward distribution, node operator reward distribution, claiming, staking RPL, unstaking RPL, using unclaimed funds for deposits, capital distribution, and kind of like MEV penalties. Although this is at the smart contract level, this is basically the ODAL being able to apply smart MEV penalties, but not. It's the kind of the way that the smart contracts can apply them, but not necessarily the logic behind the penalties. There are 2 separate things. And then kind of like how the bond curve works. So adding a validator and having that bond curve, having a different bond curve, and getting credit for overbonding and that sort of stuff. That is essentially DevNet 2. So it's mainly around claiming of rewards, RPL staking, and and these kind of like MEV penalties and the bond curves and being this kind of like notion of being bonded to a certain bond curve and that sort of stuff. So that's what we're working on at the moment. And in terms of that, it's going really well. We're mainly working on like the reward distribution and capital distribution stuff at the moment. That's kind of Kane's been working through that, and Fornax is working on the smart node side of things because the capital distribution has like a proof that you have to generate, and so that's quite an intensive process. So he's working on that at the moment as well. In terms of where we are, we're probably a bit behind where I would like us to be, but at the same time, we're probably working on the hardest part of it. The rest of it is more, I would say, is more, more, but it's easier essentially. There's not as much kind of like complexity in the other stuff. It's pretty similar to what we've done before, and so that's so we're probably working on the more complex part, which is going to take a little bit longer, and then we'll be able to go a little bit quicker with the other things. So that's so it's not necessarily that we're behind, but we are probably a bit behind where I was hoping that we would be. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to hit it either. So because of that, because the other stuff is going to be a bit easier.
What are you still feeling like the release date? I know before you were saying early Q3. Is that still your thought?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's still my thought at the moment. Obviously, it depends on where how this DevNet 2 goes, and kind of like the ramifications of the 2-transaction, 3-transaction thing. None of those, I would say, are things that will delay us for very long. But yeah, really, it comes down to how we deal with this DevNet 2 stuff. So we'll kind of like work through and we'll make sure that we communicate that as we go. One of the really good things about having this kind of process of delivering these DevNets is that we get to communicate better progress with you guys in terms of where we are and where we're at. And so yeah, if we go over the DevNet 2 date, then we are tracking slower. Again, if depending on like scope negotiations and that sort of stuff, we may still, even if we did go over the DevNet 2 time, we may still be able to deliver it on time. But yeah, so essentially it's fine for now, but we need to figure out how what's happening with this DevNet 2 stuff.
Okay, yeah. Anything else you want to cover in terms of Saturn before we talk about kind of regulatory changes?
No, I think it's pretty good. I think the a big shout out to like Val for kind of doing the governance cleanup behind us as well, which was really good. So we obviously the votes that came out today, the other day, this week. Some of that had essentially a cleanup of some of the decisions that we make along the way, and that's really important because what that means is that all the governance stuff is happening at the same time as development, and so it does mean that there shouldn't be any delays in terms of like governance and launching. So that's really good and that's really helpful.
Yeah, maybe we should cover that since you mentioned it, right? So there's 3 active votes, and all of them are on snapshot right now, correct?
Correct.
Perfect. And they're active votes. So if you haven't had a chance to read through them or vote on it, please do so. It's got maybe what, another 10 days or so in the voting window. I'm just guessing from my recollection.
Yes, it is. Yeah, like it finishes on the 20th, so yeah, not 9 days.
Perfect. And then maybe it's still there or not there, but I guess there's one on-chain vote, and I think this might have happened in between our calls here, but I guess we recognize that our previous governance said we needed to have a supermajority vote, but our on-chain voting mechanism is just a simple, well, it's not even a simple majority. It's just uh, you know, uh, outcome with the largest vote wins. So I guess the instructions now are to just ignore that on-chain vote, and it will eventually expire without meeting a quorum threshold. Is that correct? Is that still an active vote, or did it already expire?
It's a great question. I need to double check that. I haven't checked it, so I need to double check it.
It's okay.
But
We
yeah,
can
yeah,
we
but
can ask
yes,
Braden to
yes.
check it.
Yeah. They're already on it. So yeah, but the idea there is that'll expire, and then yeah, it's mainly so instead of doing that on-chain vote, we're actually going to do a snapshot vote instead, and we will because of this. I mean, it's basic. I think there are like two occasions where a super majority is required, and it wasn't taken into consideration when we did the raise the vote, but um, uh, the as I said, the on-chain vote doesn't support that, so we have to do essentially um, a snapshot vote first. Or sorry, we have to do it in a snapshot way instead.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, makes sense there. Well, let's maybe circle back up to the regulatory environment we started talking about. So, clearly a lot has changed, at least in the U.S. and since the new administration took over here. And we were chatting a little bit about this at a couple events in there in ETH Denver. I think everybody was trying to make sense of it in the macro sense. But in terms of Rocket Pool, what current guidance have you gotten from kind of our counsel, a law firm that's representing Rocket Pool? What is the current advice or thinking in terms of the regulatory environment now?
So basically, it is kind of like for what we've kind of like outlined in Saturn. Uh, it is a green light. I can't be really specific, because of like the legal privilege, the kind of like lawyer privilege and all that sort of stuff. But what they've kind of basically said is within the current regulatory environment, all the stuff that we've kind of like outlined with Saturn is perfectly fine, and they don't see an issue with any of it, which is probably it's reflective of the fact that at the moment the SEC have a very open door uh, kind of way of dealing with things. Obviously, that legal advice is point in time, but that's what they're kind of like seeing at the moment. So um, that is, the SEC have a very open door. They've essentially, it's actually funny because they raised like an RFI, um, and within that RFI are all the questions that should be being asked. Do you know what I mean? Like, what a regulatory body, they're the questions that a regulatory body should be asking. And now it's really the hard work, because now the community have to now answer those questions and start working towards sensible policy. And that's actually hard work, but it's something that groups like the Proof of Stake Alliance and a lot of other kind of like groups are already kind of like working with the SEC and the broader industry to actually do that. So that's really exciting because it does mean that hopefully we'll get some clarity. I would say timing wise, so staking in general is definitely a priority. Liquid staking is probably slightly harder, from what I've heard. So we'll definitely get staking clarity pretty soon. Liquid staking clarity is on the road, not too far down the road. Um, and then, but there's also some really great questions around decentralization, and what makes things decentralized and that sort of stuff. So that is a really key aspect for us, because it affects us in lots of different ways. Yeah, it essentially, from a regulatory perspective, that's a major question. Is kind of how who are the parties who actually have control over the protocol, and if if it's dispersed, how does that happen? How does that work? You know what I mean? So yeah, it's really interesting. It's going to be very interesting to watch how that plays out. And for the most part, the SEC seems to be very keen on making all of that public, all of that discussion, and the conclusions and that sort of thing, public. So yeah, that it's remarkable and amazing.
Yeah, perfect. Let me ask just a couple follow-up questions here. I guess one of the things that and I always get this a little wrong, so you might have to correct me, but I know that in Saturn, right, there's supposed to be a mechanism to provide RPL part of the ETH rewards, right? I guess this is kind of the fee switch question, right? And there were two RPIPs, right? One was kind of a buy and burn, the other one was liquidity pooling, right, or LPing. And I guess we're supposed to have a vote prior to the launch of Saturn One or the release of Saturn One that includes those as part of the option. And I understood from our conversation that really, from a regulatory point of view, right, we should be agnostic, right? Like, don't let a regulatory um, decision kind of sway the either vote, right? Pick the mechanism that the community thinks is the best mechanism to return value. But is that kind of correct? And when do we have to do that vote? And I guess this fee switch doesn't really turn on to Saturn 2, but we vote for it in Saturn 1. Maybe you can explain that as well.
Yeah, so actually, RPL benefits in two ways, right? So first of all, as an RPL staking node operator, and this is when you're staking, if you've migrated to megapools. So currently everyone's using mini pools, and when we release Saturn One, there'll be these kind of like megapools. As if you've migrated over to megapools and you're staking RPL, then you benefit, because what happens is, a certain percentage of the rETH commission goes into essentially a pot, and that is then distributed amongst RPL staking node operators, and that's ETH, right? So that actually replaces RPL inflation. So node operators won't get RPL inflation going forward, but they will get ETH rewards from the protocol. One of the awesome things about that is it means that as the protocol grows, the you know the more ETH goes to RPL staking node operators, and so that's one way in which RPL benefits. The other benefit is, even if you're just holding RPL, And that's kind of what they've kind of termed RPL value capture. So if you're just holding RPL, RPL at the moment kind of suffers a little bit because it's got like a relatively low but still quite high inflation rate. So it's 5% inflation rate at the moment with RPL, and so even holding RPL means that you're being inflated by 5% per year. Now, if you put that in like a liquidity platform or something like that, you need essentially anything. You need to earn more than 5% a year to really get kind of any yield, and so it doesn't really make it a solid asset from that perspective. So the tweak there is that the RPL inflation will reduce from 5% to 1.5%, which is already obviously really really good because you're only being kind of inflated over 1.5% instead of 5%. But then there are these two other mechanisms. So the options really are, I think there might be three options, but two there are actually two mechanisms, and then like a third option is to get all to node operators. Or anyway, I need to double check that third option. But basically, there's one option is a buy and burn mechanism where the mechanism is how it's implemented is slightly funky, but essentially a part of the rETH commission goes into a pot again, and then people can swap RPL for ETH at a certain price. And so what happens is that contract, when they swap the RPL, it'll actually burn the RPL. So give them back ETH, but burn the RPL. And so the supply of RPL will kind of like go down. Again, kind of proportionally to how big Rocket Pool gets, which again is another core aspect. And so that's kind of like the buy and burn mechanism. And really what that does is it drives down, it creates some deflationary pressure. So we've got 1.5% inflation, but then you've got this deflationary or burn mechanism as well, similar to ETH. But as we get larger, that potentially becomes more deflationary and all of that sort of thing. So that's like the buy and burn mechanism. The other mechanism is a buy and LP mechanism. So that's really just trying to get the RPL price stability, and that's really kind of what we're going for, is to try and get RPL as stable as possible, and obviously try to increase its value to a certain degree, but and that's what kind of like high liquidity would do. High liquidity and a constant kind of constant liquidity will provide a better price. So that's it's kind of like the buy and LP, which is the same sort of mechanism, except the ETH that's being used is used to buy RPL. So that's like a buy pressure, and then LP it on like a in like a balancer pool or something like that. So they're kind of like the two mechanisms, the two main mechanisms.
Okay, perfect there. Let me ask another kind of question related to the improving regulatory environment, which is kind of the Twitter account, right? I mean, it's great we have it back, but I know the team has always been very very conservative about what type of tweets it sends out in there. Does the new regulatory environment, does it provide any changes to the communications like our X account or Twitter account?
Unfortunately, not really, because we're kind of incorporated in Australia. So we have a very different regulatory environment. Ours is still quite aggressive, unfortunately. So, but we have been kind of like changing the style for external comms. So I guess we've been uber conservative with the external comms, and I think we're just being a little bit less conservative. We're still being cautious with like particular things that we say, but we're just being a little bit less conservative. So the answer to that is yes, there is a change to the external comms, but it's not necessarily because we have improved regulatory environment. It's mainly because we're willing to be a little bit less conservative on the comms.
Okay, let me ask about two other business development questions that were kind of posted in the channel with Mab. The first one was with Consensus. Any update with Consensus and their relationship with Rocket Pool?
Yeah, so that's funny actually because I was supposed to catch up with somebody from Consensus at Denver, but that ended up not happening because they weren't available. But I will follow up with them kind of online to see where they were at. Where it got to was um, they were so the guy that I was looking at is quite high level in Consensus, and they were looking at um, whether they would take more liquid staking exposure. And I left that with them. I didn't want to push them too hard, but I'll definitely go back with them to see whether that anything has moved on that. But that was kind of what they were looking at. They stake most of their ETH with their own validators, so that's their main staking source. But obviously having liquid staked ETH is handy for them because it's a bit more, it's liquid. And so he was going to basically talk to their finance department, treasury department, and see whether that was something that they would do. So I'll kind of follow up with that.
Okay, and then any thoughts about the Arbitrum? I know this was a grant that we were pursuing quite a bit to help maybe suggest Rocket Pool, and I forget who we partnered with as a potential treasury investment of Arbitrum. Any thoughts on that or any of the latest? I think we might have lost you here.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong mute button. So actually that was really disappointing. The community put a lot of work into that. So AlphaGrove kind of led and submitted some of the work for that. But we had like the IMC, the GMC, the team. A lot of us got together to try and figure out what, and we also pulled in, partners. I'll put that in air quotes, but collaborators, people like Balancer and Aave and that sort of thing to try and get the best submission. And I think we came up with a really good submission, and then it kind of like fell on deaf ears and they went in a different direction. I don't know how like I don't think we've had any feedback on our submission, and I don't know whether there's necessarily been too much transparency on how they made that decision. But it's disappointing. So we thought and it's disappointing that they would go. I think that because I from what I understand, they went all in on basically STETH, and that seems bizarre to me. Like I like even just on a risk perspective, it doesn't make sense. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Um, I'm not quite sure what their reasonings are for that. But we'll fight on. We'll hopefully we can get some feedback on it, and kind of like learn from that process. But otherwise, there's kind of other deals that we can try and make. And I think, to be honest, what we're learning is we are kind of like learning how this ecosystem works in terms of these deals. So particularly the cross chain deals. So that's definitely something that we're getting a much better handle on. So yeah, it should get easier as we get smarter, basically.
Yeah, I did see. I think I sent this to Jonathan over at Alpha Growth, but I did see kind of maybe coming back from ETH Denver or whatever that even folks in the Arbitrum community were kind of questioning the decision, and there was a little bit of a thought about maybe challenging it to to a veto or a recall on it. So I don't know if I don't know if it's still there. Yeah, in fact, he just posted in training. He said many of the Arbitrum ecosystem were upset because no Arbitrum DApp was selected. Yeah, so I don't know if they'll reconsider it or not, but I do think it is a learning experience, and and in some ways it's par for the course in sales development, right? It takes about 10 good leads to finally land a thing, so it's always a tough market, right? You need to have multiple leads at multiple periods, but it was a little disappointing, I will say, that Arbitrum didn't even share some of its support or diversify some of its treasury investments. Let me ask another question here. So one of the things I know that we're kind of pursuing a little bit, you said earlier, was the cross chain bridges and development that way. And I guess one of the ones that's under development here or under consideration is the Ronin Bridge and Avalanche. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so we had a big chat with Chainlink, and we've kind of had a talk with Alpha Growth as well. So um, so there we've basically been kind of like mapping out what's going on there. So um, we don't actually necessarily need to take ownership of the rETH contract. Having ownership of the rETH contract has the benefit of we could have like a multi-bridge strategy, um, which, to be honest, trade-off wise, I don't know whether that's necessarily where we don't necessarily want to go that way anyway. Um, the other area that we thought we needed the kind of like we needed to take ownership of the bridge was around fees. Now, if we wanted like a purely trustless fee mechanism, then maybe we would need to take ownership of the contract. Um, but with like CCIP, for example, we can actually do it without taking ownership contract. So essentially, Chainlink would take the fee for us and then pass it on to us. But then again, that also depends on whether we want to take a fee or not. So the big question for really the big question for Ronin and Avalanche is whether we take a fee or not. And for Avalanche, it is whether we use CCIP or the canonical bridge. They're the two decisions that we need to make. And I think working with Alpha Growth and also um, doing this sort of thing has highlighted kind of like an issue with how we work, in the sense that we have these management committees that have really kind of like tight charters, which is really good. I think having the charters, you know, guide how these management committees work is really important. But then, but then kind of like things decision wise can slip through the cracks. Things that appear between, or decisions that need to be made within the gaps are hard to make. So we need to. So that's actually something that I'm going to post in the governance thread today, or governance channel today, and that is, how can we kind of like help that process of when we have a decision that falls between the cracks, how do we get that done, and what is that process, so that we, like, even if it is okay, we need to put it on the DAO forum, we need to get sentiment poll, we need to do this, we need to do that. At least have that process mapped out, so that those decisions can get made, as opposed to at the moment where we're kind of like a bit confused about how things might get made. It's not necessarily as clear what that path is. So that's definitely something that I'm kind of hoping to push forward.
Yeah, perfect. And I just see Alpha Growth is posted in trading here that Avalanche is not adding any more assets to their canonical bridge. Instead, I guess our DAO will have to decide which bridge will be our canonical
Gotcha.
bridge for our ETH. Yeah.
Yeah, and that would definitely make the decision easier in terms of like using something like CCIP, or another kind of bridge technology. I mean, one of the things that's made Avalanche and Ronin a bit trickier, and again, I think once we get past this hump, it'll be a lot easier. It's just we just need to get past this speed bump, and that is because up until now we've only really been on, apart from maybe Polygon POS, which I'm not even sure how we bridge there. Anyway, pretty much all of the places that we've been to have been roll-ups, generally, and they have their own canonical bridges, right? And they're often permissionless canonical bridges and all this sort of stuff. So it's been really easy to set that up without any sort of organizational, I guess, influence. Well, apart from the fact that the IMC kind of like direct incentives. So generally, we'll go to a chain if the IMC are going to direct incentives there, because if the IMC aren't going to direct incentives there, then it's not going to be much point. And they generally take their advice from like a poll of the community. You know, should we go to this, because they only have a certain amount of funds available to them. They want to make sure that they're focusing on the right places, and so they get kind of like an idea from the community about where they should be going. And so, but you know, we've never really had to use another bridge technology. And with a canonical bridge, the trust assumption is that if you trust the chain that you're going to, then you trust the bridge. With a separate bridge technology, you have to trust the bridge technology and you have to trust the chain you're going to. So, so there were kind of like these mixed trust assumptions. I think we just need to get over that hump. I think we need to decide if we're going to other chains. Are we going to use a consistent bridge technology? What bridge technology is that, and how does it get rolled out? And I think we just need to get over that speed bump. As I said, once that speed bump we've gotten over that, then it becomes a lot easier to do this thing. I do think one of the things that's kind of hold us back is that we haven't really necessarily cared about other chains that much. Maybe that's like an ETH bias within the kind of like community, but we haven't necessarily cared about other chains. One of the things that was interesting when I spoke to both Alpha Growth and Chainlink as well is they've kind of echoed that a lot of the growth opportunities are on those new. They don't have necessarily the amount of TVL that ETH have, but they are kind of like growth opportunities, and in general they often have a lot of incentives that they're throwing around for rETH holders and that sort of thing. So so having a chain strategy, I mean, even if that chain strategy is we should ignore other chains, which I don't think is necessarily the right way to go, but we have to have some strategy for it going forward.
Okay, perfect. The Dr. Doofus always has a good one-liner there in trading. But yeah, Langer, is anything else about Rocket Pool that we haven't covered on today's episode that you feel is important for the community to know?
Yeah. I mean, it's really it's really that the team are working hard behind the scenes, getting kind of Saturn done. I think Saturn is going to really help us going forward. There's a lot of stuff in there that's going to push Rocket Pool forward. Even there's some discussions around like different funding models for the DAO as well, which is quite interesting. And that's potentially using a little bit of the rETH commission to fund the DAO. That it's interesting because that has some ramifications in the sense that as you know, as Rocket Pool the protocol increase, what it does is it kind of aligns the protocol funding with TVL, which actually is a good incentive kind of like balance, and so that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot going on within the community, a lot of opportunities, a lot of kind of like learning, and a lot of development, obviously from our perspective. So I think it's really good. We're in a bit of a flux kind of period, but I think the stuff that we're doing now is really going to build the foundations of the future. So the things that the DAO itself as an organization is learning, and also the code that we're building, all of that sets us up for a really good foundation for the future. So yeah, that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. And I guess maybe to just end this out here, I know we just got back from ETH Denver, and probably the last thing you're thinking about is yet another conference for it. But no sooner did we get back, finally the EF announced it was a rumor. It was maybe everybody was talking about it in the corners at ETH Denver, which is when Dev Connect and where Dev Connect. And now we have the dates in November, and we know the location is in Argentina, and I saw they even released the venue. Um, what are the team's plans for Dev Connect? Have you guys had a chance to think about it yet?
Yeah, I dare not mention that to my wife just yet. I need more time. I need more time to for the ETH Denver to pass. So we've started talking about Dev Connect in Argentina. It's an amazing opportunity, and Dev Connect Dev Connect is much more staking orientated. So we would usually definitely go to Dev Connect. I think at this point in time we haven't made a call. Like it's very likely that we will, but we haven't made a specific call on it yet. As you said, it's quite early, but we are already discussing it, which is a good sign.
Yeah, and I know for those that aren't familiar with Dev Connect, it's kind of a week in a location, and then the EF just kind of helps you find venues, but it's really a side event conference. This year might be a little different with one day. The EF was kind of signaling, hey, that day we might do a special, all hands presentation or something like that. But short of that day, it's going to be a whole bunch of side events. And I know that the ETH staking community is already well into planning for a nice 2-day conference exclusively just on Ethereum staking with the staker. So I think there could be a lot of overlaps with that, and I know the rest of the staking community will, start to circle around and be there. So yeah, it's definitely something to look forward to and to start planning. And it's great to see the announcement out so people can start kind of planning the 6 months ahead here.
Yeah, because when I say that it's a bit of a staking thing, yeah, there's the ETH Staker like conference, and then there's also that staking summit as well, which is put on by Staking Rewards. So that they're kind of like these two specific staking mini conference, well, not mini conferences actually, because they're more in one day. So these little mini conferences at Dev Connect. And then, as you said, like this whole heap of like side events and that sort of stuff. So that could be quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try to swing away to make it there. And for anyone that's listening and interested, in the conferences channel, there's already a sub thread in there. Just look at the threads in the conferences and you'll see Dev Connect 25 in Buenos Aires. And yeah, definitely if you're interested, subscribe to that thread and pay attention. I'm sure as a lot develops over the spring and summer here, you'll start seeing a lot of posts. And then, Mav, I don't know if you're still with us or not, but do we have anything else lined up for future Rocket Pool community calls?
Hey Ken, yes, we do. Hopefully, you can hear me now. One that we've been talking to for a little while is Inception LRT. So, it's been a little while since we've had a restaking focused community call guest. In actual fact, I think the previous one might have been all the way back with Eigenlayer, but regardless, the restaking industry has moved on a little bit since then. So it'll be really interesting to hopefully get those guys on and hear from them what's happening over in restaking world. From memory, they were based in Europe, so fingers crossed for a Europe-friendly time for that one.
Excellent. Well, Mav and Lingers, anything else we want to cover before we bring today's call to a conclusion? I don't know if there's any questions from the community here. No one's chimed in or whatever. Oh, and Dr. D says thanks Lingers for addressing a lot of a lot of the questions that he had.
Well, then that's all good. You're welcome, and thanks again, Ken. As always, lovely to speak to you.
Read a Mav's comment, but yeah, believe it or not, it's only been maybe not even a week since ETH Denver, but I already miss hanging out with you guys and the rest of the Rocket Pool community. So it's always great to chat a little bit here on the community calls. And if not, I guess I'll be seeing everyone in trading and maybe commiserating with everyone about the Ethereum price action and maybe trying to understand it a little bit more today.
Yeah, I don't think there's much understanding it. We just have to hold on for dear life, I think.
All right, see you too. Bye, everyone.